I need to tell you something that happened on a Tuesday morning in London that I still think about. Not because it was dramatic in the way films are dramatic, not because anyone gave a speech or got a medal right there on the street, but because of what I saw in 15 seconds, 15 seconds that I actually counted under my breath, that changed the way I understood what duty really means. I was standing near the eastern edge of Hyde Park, corner of Park Lane and South Carriage Drive, if you know London. It was early, the kind of morning where the sky can't decide if it wants to be gray or blue, so it just picks both. Thin cloud, watery sun, that particular chill that London does in late October where it isn't cold enough to be cold, but it's cold enough to know you should have worn another layer. I had a coffee in one hand, one of those paper cups that's too hot to hold properly so you keep swapping hands. I was waiting for a friend. She was late, as she always is, and I'd been standing near the park railings for about 10 minutes just watching people go by. There were tourists. There are always tourists near Hyde Park in the morning. A group of them, I heard French, I think maybe Belgian, were taking photographs of the Albert Memorial across the road. One man had one of those big cameras with a lens that seems too large for what you'd ever actually need. He was photographing pigeons, just pigeons. Like they were the most remarkable thing he'd ever seen. A woman was walking two golden retrievers. One of the dogs stopped and refused to move for about 30 seconds, and she just stood there, resigned, the lead going slack, looking at her phone. Very London, very ordinary. And then there were two men in uniform near the corner. Not the red and bearskin kind of uniform, not ceremonial guards. These were Metropolitan Police officers. Dark jackets, high-visibility vests, the yellow that you see all over the city. They had radios. One of them was taller, broad across the shoulders, and he was speaking into his radio as he walked. The other one was younger, you could tell by the way he moved, that slight stiffness people have when they're still getting used to being in authority. Between them was a third man. He was wearing the uniform of a household cavalry guard. Not the full ceremonial dress, not the shining breastplate and the plumed helmet, but the working dress. Dark trousers, jacket, the insignia on his shoulder. He was a tall man, maybe 30, maybe a little older. A straight back. The kind of posture that isn't just habit, it's something that gets trained into you over years. And his hands were behind his back. I noticed that first before I even really registered what it meant. Just that his arms were positioned strangely. And then the light caught it, the dull silver of handcuffs. His wrists were cuffed behind him. He was walking between these two officers, and his face was, I'm trying to think of the right word, controlled. Not blank, controlled. Like every muscle in his face, had been instructed to hold still. People around me noticed too. It happens in London the way it happens everywhere, a small ripple of attention. The French tourists stopped photographing the pigeons. The woman with the golden retrievers looked up from her phone. A cyclist slowed down, one foot off the pedal, balancing, watching. There was a murmur that ran through the small cluster of people near me. Not words exactly. Just that collective exhale that means something is happening. I want to tell you what happened in those 15 seconds, but to do that I have to tell you what happened before them. The guard's name, I learned it later from the news, from reports, was Corporal Daniel Ashworth. He'd been stationed that morning not at the Hyde Park barracks, technically, but near the park perimeter as part of an extended security presence that had been put in place 3 days earlier. I didn't know that at the time. I didn't know any of it. I just saw a man in handcuffs being walked along the pavement. What I didn't know, standing there with my paper cup of coffee, was that 45 minutes earlier a device had gone off. Not a large one, not a catastrophic one, but a device, a bomb the news would later call it. A small improvised device in the careful language they use had detonated in a bin near the south end of the park, close to the bandstand area. The blast had been contained. Smoke, debris, a crater in the ground, one man with injuries to his hand. 4 people treated for shock. But it had gone off. And what that meant in the immediate aftermath, in the chaos of those first minutes before anyone had a clear picture, was that the area had gone into lockdown. Protocols activated. Officers everywhere. And in that lockdown, in the confusion, with information moving in fragments and descriptions going out over radios that were incomplete, a household cavalry guard in plain working dress, not in a location he was immediately expected to be in, had been stopped. He had been stopped because he matched, loosely, a description that had been circulated, or because he was moving against the flow of people who were moving away from the area. Or because, and I think this is actually what happened, based on what I read later, because he had been found standing still when everything around him was moving, and that had seemed, to the officers who found him, like something that needed an explanation. And he had been handcuffed while they sorted it out. That's the part that matters. That's the part I want you to hold on to. He had been handcuffed while they sorted it out. The three of them were walking toward a police vehicle that was parked about 30 meters ahead of where I was standing. I could see it, a dark blue van, side door open, one more officer standing beside it. The morning traffic was moving slowly around it. I was watching, most people were watching. The kind of watching you do when you know you shouldn't stare but you can't quite stop. And then something happened on the pavement ahead of them. A man, civilian, tourist, heavy jacket, one of those zip-up fleeces with a logo on the chest, stepped out of a shop doorway. He hadn't seen the group coming. He was looking at his phone. He walked forward without looking up. And he walked directly into the path of the younger officer, the one on the left side. The officer put out a hand to stop him instinctively, and in doing so, just for a moment, just a fraction of a second, there was a gap, a stumble of position. The choreography of the group broke for a moment. And the handcuffed man, Corporal Ashworth, in that exact moment, turned his head. Not toward escape, not toward freedom. He turned his head because from somewhere behind them, from back in the direction of the park, there was a sound. A sharp crack, then a hiss, then a sound I can only describe as a secondary report, not another bomb, but something mechanical failing under pressure, like a gas line or a valve. A bin, I think, though I never confirmed it. Something that had been damaged in the earlier blast and had finally given. The sound was sudden enough that people reacted. The French tourists dropped to a crouch. The woman with the dogs grabbed both leads tight and took a step back. Someone near me made a short, involuntary sound, the kind that escapes before your mind has finished deciding what's happening. The taller officer's hand went to his radio immediately. The younger one stepped left, turning toward the sound, hand going instinctively to his vest. And in that motion, in that turning, the group's structure broke completely. For approximately 4 or 5 seconds, the handcuffed man was standing, essentially, free of escort. Not physically free, he was still cuffed. He couldn't go anywhere but free of the tight walking formation. Both officers had moved in response to the sound. He was standing between them, but neither of them was physically holding him, gripping him, guiding him. I watched him, and here is what I watched him do. He didn't move forward. He didn't run, which would have been physically difficult but not impossible with cuffed hands. He didn't turn around. He didn't say anything. He planted his feet. He stood up straighter, if that was even possible, because he was already standing very straight, and he turned his body so that he was facing outward, away from the direction of the sound, scanning the pavement and the road and the people around him. Like he was checking. Like, handcuffed between 2 police officers in the middle of a security incident, his first instinct was to make sure the area around him was clear. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, maybe 4. Both officers turned back. The older one grabbed his arm again. The younger one said something I couldn't hear. And Corporal Ashworth turned back toward the vehicle, walked. Didn't look at the crowd, didn't look at me. That was it, 15 seconds roughly, start to finish. I stood there after they'd gone, after the van door had closed and the vehicle had pulled back into the traffic, and I tried to work out what I'd just seen. The tourists were talking again, louder now, animated, the way people get after a small scare. The woman with the dogs had bent down to comfort the retriever who'd been startled. Someone further along the pavement was filming on a phone, too late, pointing at where the van had been. And I was thinking about that posture. That planted feet, squared shoulders, scanning outward posture. A man in handcuffs. A man who'd been stopped, presumably, because someone decided he looked like a problem. A man who, for all he knew, was about to spend the next several hours explaining himself to a room full of people who might or might not believe him. A man who had every reason to feel aggrieved, disoriented, frightened, all three, and who had used a moment of inattention, a moment when nobody was holding him, to do exactly one thing. Check that the people around him were safe. Not to complain, not to protest, not to take advantage, just to look outward, just to check. I keep coming back to that. I've thought about it many times since then. What that says about someone, what it takes actually to be that person in that moment. I should tell you more about the morning itself, because the atmosphere of it matters. It wasn't a day that felt like a significant day. That's the thing about these kinds of events. They don't arrive with warning signs. You don't wake up and feel the weight of what's about to happen in the air. I'd come to that corner of Park Lane because my friend Miriam works near Lancaster Gate, and we'd arranged to walk through the park together before she started her shift. She works at a small architectural firm, always running late, always apologetic about it in a way that never quite produces punctuality. I'd been awake since 6. I'd taken the tube from Bethnal Green, changed at Notting Hill Gate, walked from there. The sort of Tuesday that exists only as a container for things that haven't happened yet. Hyde Park in late October has a particular quality. The leaves have largely gone from the trees, but not all of them. You get these isolated patches of amber and copper where one tree is holding on longer than its neighbors. The paths are damp without being wet. There are dog walkers always, joggers in compression gear, the occasional horse rider from the barracks making their way toward Rotten Row. I'd seen a household cavalry officer on horseback perhaps 20 minutes before all of this happened. Same working dress, not ceremonial, just the everyday uniform. He'd been riding north along the path near Park Lane, back very straight, eyes forward, utterly indifferent to the Tuesday morning around him. I'd watched him for a moment and thought the obvious tourist thought, what a strange and specific life that must be. 20 minutes later, I was watching another one being walked to a police van in handcuffs. The morning has a sense of humor. The bomb, and I keep having to remind myself that there had actually been a bomb. That morning, not far from where I was standing, had gone off at approximately 8:47. By the time I arrived at the Park Lane corner at around 9:15, the immediate response was already in full motion, but the information hadn't fully reached the public yet. There were more police than usual, which I'd noticed and filed away as probably unrelated to me. There was a distant sound of sirens, which is not unusual in London. There were a couple of officers moving purposefully along the south side of the park, but London has purposeful officers on a normal day. It wasn't until I saw Ashworth and the 2 officers, and then looked at my phone and saw the first push notification from a news app saying, "Explosion reported near Hyde Park, emergency services attending," that the morning rearranged itself. That is a strange experience, standing still while the meaning of everything around you shifts. The extra police presence now explained, the sirens explained, the heightened alertness in the faces of the officers on the pavement explained. And the handcuffed guard, now more complicated. Because if there had been a bomb, a real bomb, even a small one, even a contained one, then the security response in the aftermath would have been real too. And in a real security response, in the immediate minutes after a device goes off, and nobody knows if there are more, a man in a military uniform who is not where he's supposed to be and who perhaps cannot immediately produce the right identification or the right answer to the right questions. That man is going to be stopped. Not because the officers stopping him are wrong to stop him, because the situation is what it is. And knowing that the handcuffs were the correct response in a chaotic moment, not a mistake, not an injustice, made what Ashworth had done with those 3 or 4 seconds of inattention even stranger to think about. He would have known, he would have understood exactly why he was being stopped. He would have had the training to recognize a security lockdown response when he was inside one. He would have known that cooperation was the correct answer, that this would resolve, that the process would work itself out. And in a small gap in that process, his instinct wasn't to assert himself. It wasn't even to reassure himself. It was to look outward. Miriam arrived 11 minutes late. She came around the corner from the direction of Marble Arch, slightly breathless, her scarf not quite wound properly, holding her own coffee cup. She said, "Have you seen the news? There's been something near the bandstand." I said yes. She looked at the place where the police van had been. Was something happening here too? I told her what I'd seen. I told her about the guard and the handcuffs and the 15 seconds. I tried to describe the posture, the planted feet, the turn outward, the scanning. She listened. She has a good face for listening, Miriam. She doesn't fill the silence with sounds or reactions. She just receives what you're saying. When I finished, she said, "That's a very specific thing to notice." I said I couldn't help it. She said, "No, I mean, you noticed it because it was worth noticing." We walked into the park after that. The paths near the bandstand were closed off. You could see the tape from a distance, blue and white, officers standing at intervals. The rest of the park was eerily normal, the way London gets after incidents. People walking dogs, someone running. A man sitting on a bench eating a sandwich at 9:30 in the morning, which is its own kind of statement. Later that day, I looked up the Hyde Park barracks. I looked up household cavalry. I read things I half knew and half didn't, the history of it, the training, what it means to be posted at that particular corner of London life, the ceremonial role and the operational one, the fact that these are not purely decorative figures, not living statues for tourists, that the training is real, and the role is real, and the posture you see on those horses along the Mall is the result of something serious and sustained. I thought about what it would feel like to have that training, that particular kind of discipline, and to be stopped on a pavement in handcuffs because a bomb has gone off, and the situation is fluid, and the protocol says stop people who don't immediately fit. I thought about whether I would, in that moment, have planted my feet and looked outward. I thought probably not. The news that afternoon carried the story of the device near the bandstand. Small, crude, not sophisticated. No group claimed responsibility. Investigation ongoing. One man hospitalized. Several treated and released. The area reopened by the early afternoon. The story did not mention Corporal Ashworth. There was nothing in the news about a guard being stopped and handcuffed. No footage emerged. If anyone had filmed it, it didn't reach the news cycle, or it wasn't considered newsworthy, or it was simply absorbed into the larger story of the day. He had been stopped, identified, released. The system had worked in its grinding procedural way. He had walked back to wherever he needed to be. The officers had gotten back into the van or continued their patrol or done whatever comes next. And the morning had continued. There's something I've been trying to say, and I'm not sure I've said it yet. It's not about heroism in the obvious sense. Nobody was saved in those 15 seconds. No crisis was averted. The handcuffed guard scanning a London pavement on a Tuesday morning didn't stop anything. But there's something about the reflexivity of it, the automaticity. The fact that it wasn't a decision, or if it was a decision so fast, so deeply embedded, that it happened before conscious thought caught up with it. His hands were behind his back and his eyes went outward, protective, watchful. I think about training a lot. What we practice becomes what we are. What we repeat deliberately over years becomes the shape of us, not what we intend in calm moments. What we do when the situation is strange and the morning has broken into pieces and there are handcuffs on our wrists. A man who has trained to protect, placed under restriction, in a moment of inattention, tries to protect. That's the whole story. Everything else is just October light and London traffic and a paper cup too hot to hold. End of part 1. Part 2. There's a second part to this morning that I haven't told you yet. I told you about the 15 seconds. I told you about Ashworth and the planted feet and the scanning eyes. I told you about Miriam arriving and the walk through the park with the tape in the distance. But I didn't tell you about what happened at 3:40 in the afternoon. And that's the part that changes the shape of everything. By 3 o'clock, I was back across the city. Miriam had gone to work. I'd spent the morning in a coffee shop in Bayswater doing the work I'd gone to that part of London to do, laptop, headphones, unremarkable. The kind of afternoon that comes after an unusual morning and tries to make you feel like the morning was less unusual than it was. I came back to Hyde Park at 3:30 because I wanted to. I'm not sure I can explain it more clearly than that. Something about the morning had left a residue, and I wanted to see the park in the afternoon, when it would be different, when the tape would probably be gone and the pavement would just be a pavement again. I came in through the Marble Arch entrance and walked south. The bandstand area was still technically cordoned, the blue and white tape still there, though one end had come loose and was drifting slightly in the wind, and there was only one officer left standing near it rather than the several from the morning. The actual bandstand was fine, undamaged. The blast had been in the bin about 40 meters north of it, and what the explosion had actually damaged was mostly the bin itself and a small patch of path. A handful of people were standing near the tape looking at nothing in particular. That thing people do at incident sites, trying to see something that isn't there anymore. I walked past them and came around toward the South Carriage Drive, and that's when I saw him. Corporal Ashworth. Or rather, a man I was almost certain was Corporal Ashworth, because the face matched the image I'd held in my mind all morning. Though I should say, by mid-afternoon I knew his name from a small online thread, a bystander's account posted on a forum, then referenced in a couple of comments, and there was a photo attached. Working dress, same build, same straight back. He was not in handcuffs. He was standing near the southeast edge of the park, just outside the formal boundary on the pavement side of the railings, and he was alone. He wasn't doing anything particularly notable. He was just standing. And he was watching the bandstand area. I almost walked past. I nearly talked myself out of it. I have a habit of deciding that strangers don't want to be bothered, which is sometimes correct and sometimes an excuse. But I slowed down as I came level with him, and he glanced at me. And I did the most English possible thing. I nodded, the small nod that means I see you and I respect that you exist and I don't intend to trouble you. He nodded back, and I said before I could stop myself, I was there this morning, Park Lane side. He didn't say anything for a moment. He looked back toward the bandstand. Then he said, long morning. That was it. That was the complete sentence. I said yes. We stood in a not entirely comfortable, but not entirely uncomfortable silence for about 10 seconds. The kind of silence where both people are accepting that they are momentarily occupying the same emotional address, even if they barely know each other. Then I said, and I'm slightly embarrassed by this because it's the kind of thing that sounds strange when you say it out loud, the thing you did, when the officers turned around, when they heard the sound. He looked at me properly then, just a look, not suspicious, not defensive, just a look that was also a question. I said, the way you turned, the way you scanned. He considered this, then he said, I don't know what you mean. And I believed him. I don't mean he was lying. I mean I believed that he genuinely didn't know what I meant, not because it hadn't happened, but because for him it wasn't a notable thing. It wasn't a conscious choice he could recall and reflect on. It was just what happened. His body did what his body had been trained to do, and then the moment moved forward, and that was that. He wasn't being modest. He just didn't have the experience of it that I had, because he had been inside it and I had been outside watching it. And those are two completely different experiences of the same 15 seconds. I didn't stay long. It wasn't that kind of conversation. There was nothing to stay for, really, no narrative we were building toward together. He wasn't going to tell me his story. I wasn't going to tell him mine. We were just two people who'd been in the same strange morning and had briefly and accidentally acknowledged it. Before I walked away, I said, I hope the rest of the day is less complicated. He gave me the smallest possible version of a smile. The kind that barely moves the mouth but reaches the eyes. They generally are, he said, after a morning like that. And then he went back to watching the bandstand. I want to talk about what I've been sitting with since then, because I've told you the facts of the morning, but I'm not sure I've told you the thing under the facts. Duty is a word we use and then put down without really looking at it. We use it in speeches. We use it to describe people we admire from a distance. We use it in a kind of appreciative but abstract way, the way you appreciate a mountain for existing without particularly feeling the weight of its stone. I've done that, I do it regularly. But watching Corporal Ashworth, watching him in handcuffs, watching him in those 3 or 4 seconds of inattention, watching him scan the street outside himself, I had the experience of seeing duty not as an abstraction but as a physical thing. A posture, a turn of the body, a direction of the eyes. It wasn't a sermon. It wasn't even a lesson, exactly. It was just a man in a difficult situation doing the thing he was built to do without noticing that he was doing it. The thing is, he didn't choose to be stopped. He didn't choose to be handcuffed. He didn't choose to be in the middle of a security incident in a city reacting to a bomb. None of those things were his decisions. They were just the morning he'd been given. But what he did inside that morning, what he did with the moments he had available, that was entirely his. I've thought about the bomb itself, the device in the bin near the bandstand. I know very little about it beyond what the news reported. Small, improvised, probably not the work of a sophisticated network. One man hospitalized. Investigation ongoing. The kind of thing that generates a day of coverage and then subsides into the longer narrative of city security and response protocols. But that device, crude and contained as it was, sent a kind of wave through the morning. It changed the temperature of everything it touched. It turned a Tuesday into something else. It put handcuffs on a guard's wrists and tape around a section of a beautiful park and extra tension into the faces of every officer within half a mile. A small thing with large ripples. And in those ripples, a man on a pavement turned his eyes outward. That's the answer to the bomb, in a way. Not in any tactical or security sense, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the human answer. When the city is disrupted, when the morning cracks, when someone puts a device in a bin and detonates it, what do you do with what's left of the day? Ashworth's answer in 15 seconds with his hands behind his back was, you watch the people around you, you check, you keep your feet planted. There were other people in this story who did notable things that I've barely mentioned. The first officer who stopped Ashworth, the taller one, made the correct call in a chaotic moment. A man in the wrong place at the wrong time during a live incident in a city just reacted to an explosion. Stopping him wasn't cruelty or incompetence. It was the morning being the morning. The paramedics who treated the man injured in the blast. The officer who stood alone at the tape in the afternoon, doing the dull but necessary work of making sure the cordon stayed intact even after the excitement had passed. The woman with the golden retrievers who stopped to ask, on her way back around the park, if the officer at the tape was all right. I saw that. She said something, and he said something back, and she walked on, and it lasted maybe 8 seconds, and it was the most ordinarily kind thing I saw all day. London in crisis moments tends to show you both the worst possible concern, that someone put a bomb somewhere, and the most ordinary possible goodness. The woman with the dogs checking on the officer. The way people near the tape were quiet rather than loud, the way they gave each other space, the way nobody pushed or jostled or made the situation worse. The city handles itself mostly. It has practice. There's a version of this morning I almost missed entirely. If Miriam had been on time, we'd have been in the park. We'd have walked in the opposite direction from the bandstand, probably, toward the Serpentine, toward the water where we usually go. We'd have heard something at a distance, maybe. We'd have noticed the sirens and thought about checking the news. We'd have had a slightly anxious Tuesday walk. Instead, she was 11 minutes late, and I was standing on the corner of Park Lane, and I saw 15 seconds that I've been carrying around for weeks. Timing is everything. It's a cliché because it's structurally true. The atoms of the morning arrange themselves one way or another, and you get a view of something or you don't. I got a view. I want to tell you one more thing that happened. 2 days after that Tuesday, I came back to Hyde Park. I'm not being melodramatic about it. I had a meeting in Paddington and Hyde Park was on the way, and I walked through it the way I've walked through it 100 times. Late October, gray sky, leaves down, that particular London quiet that sits underneath the London noise. I walked past the bandstand. The tape was completely gone now. The bin had been replaced. There was a new one, same style, maybe 3 or 4 meters from where the old one had been. You'd never know, standing there, that anything had happened. The grass was slightly marked, a patch of it where it had been disturbed by whatever examination had gone on, but even that was already recovering. The park was just the park again. And then I came around toward the South Carriage Drive, and I saw a household cavalry rider coming along Rotten Row. Not Ashworth, a younger rider, slight, moving well, the horse relaxed under him. The usual sight, upright posture, eyes ahead, the anachronistic dignity of it. I stopped and watched until they passed the line of trees and disappeared from view. And I thought about what it means to do something regardless of who is watching. To maintain the posture when there's no crowd, when there's no ceremony, when it's just the damp October path and the last of the leaves and the city going about its business on a Thursday morning. To do it because it's the thing you do, because it's what you are. That's the part that stays with me the most. Not the drama of the handcuffs, not the sound that broke the morning open, not even those 15 seconds themselves. It's the rider on Rotten Row on a Thursday. It's Ashworth standing at the railings at 3:30 in the afternoon looking at a bandstand where a bomb went off and not making it mean anything more than that he was still watching, still present, still turned outward. There's a question I've never fully answered for myself, which is, why does this matter? Why does a civilian on a pavement watching a guard for 15 seconds qualify as something worth telling? I think because most of the things we admire in other people are things we see performed, speeches, actions, visible choices, the things that get recorded. The things that show up in the news or in history, or in whatever account gets made of what happened. But most of what makes someone who they are doesn't happen in those moments. It happens in the gaps. In the seconds when nobody is holding you and the officers have looked away, and you could, technically, let your guard down, and you don't. Not because someone is watching. Not because it will be noted. Just because it's who you are when the structure falls away for a moment, and there's nothing left but what you were built to do. A bomb went off near Hyde Park on a Tuesday in late October. One man was hurt. A park was briefly closed. The city carried on. The leaves came off the trees on schedule, indifferent to all of it. And a guard stood his post, hands behind his back, feet planted, eyes outward, in 15 seconds that almost nobody saw. I saw them, and I won't forget them.